This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the result against Burnley by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you an exclusive interview with Frank de Boer, Jason Puncheon and Levi Lekema after the game. So let's begin. Despite the search for their first Premier League point and goal of the campaign extending, Palace were desperately unlucky not to achieve both on a frustrating afternoon at Burnley. Chris Wood's early strike ultimately settled the game in the Claret's favour, but Frank de Boer's team would spend the rest of the match dominating possession, territory and chances, but simply couldn't find a way to force the ball home. Having carved out 23 opportunities during the encounter, late ones from Christian Benteke and Scott Dann failed to be converted, meaning the Eagles still remained pointless and goalless despite deserving both from this performance. Things began disastrously for Palace as they fell behind after just 2 minutes. There seemed to be little danger when Chung-yong Lee received possession in the Claret's half on the left flank, but he attempted a risky back pass towards Wayne Hennessy from 50 yards away. But it was far too short and seized up by Wood, who curved the ball home from 25 yards out to punish the South Korean on the occasion of his 100th appearance. Such a huge setback could have sent the Eagles' heads dropping, but instead they quickly rallied and had two good opportunities to pull back immediately. Firstly, a Jason Puncheon corner found Scott Dann at the back of the box, and a superb touch and turn allowed the centre-back to fire goalwards, but Matthew Lowton cleared off the line. And then Benteke was fractions away from steering a header in from an Andros Townsend delivery. A lively opening continued when Sam Vokes was next to try and get on the scoresheet, but after a good cross by Stephen Ward found the striker, he also sent his header just wide. And the two teams' battle for aerial supremacy continued when James McArthur met a Yohan Cabaye corner on 21 minutes, but couldn't test Tom Heaton in the home goal. However, the England international's afternoon would end prematurely with 10 minutes of the half remaining, as he injured his shoulder collecting a lead cross, with Nick Pope forced to make his Premier League debut in Heaton's place. And he would make his first stop in the division in stoppage time when he comfortably saved a deflected Townsend effort from just outside the box. Despite trailing at the break, Palace had the better opportunities and would have felt hard done by at half time, and even more so following the restart as they found themselves camped in the host half but unable to penetrate a claret and blue wall that sat deep and soaked up the persistent pressure. Trying to find something different, de Boer handed Levi Lekema his professional debut just after the hour mark, but chances continued to be squandered, with Jeffrey Schlupp hastily blasting over from the edge of the box, but Hennessy would be next to be called into action when he denied last season's scourge Ashley Barnes from netting in his third successive game between the sides, by pushing away his curling effort on 73 minutes, in what would be the home side's second and final shot on target. That was a rare foray forward for Sean Dyche's team though, and soon the Eagles were back on the attack, and they came so close to an equaliser moments later, when some intricate build-up play involving Benteke, McArthur and Townsend created a sight on goal for the Belgian. However, his side-footed effort, destined for the bottom corner, was brilliantly saved by the boot of Pope. The siege on the Burnley goal continued, and Dann was denied in similar fashion to the first half, when he was once again found at the back post from a corner and blasted towards the target, only to see it scrambled away from James Tarkowski. Then Townsend saw a left-footed curler deflected wide before Cabaye had a 30-yarder flapped away by Pope. But with 90 seconds to go, possibly the best chance of the game went begging for the Eagles. A chip pass forwards was nodded into space by Benteke for Cabaye to race onto, and the Frenchman stood up a perfect cross to the back post where Dann was waiting to head in the equaliser, but he sent it wide of the mark to sum up what was a frustrating afternoon in front of goal for de Boer's men. It was dubbed as a make-or-break game for Crystal Palace boss Frank de Boer after 3 defeats in a row at the start of the Premier League season. But it was another afternoon of frustration for the Dutchman and his side, with Chris Wood's early goal pouncing on a terrible error from Chung-yong Lee, proving to be the difference in the game that the Eagles largely dominated throughout. So what do we learn from the game as the Eagles lost out 1-0 at Turf Moor? Here are 5 things. Number 1. The worst possible start. Just when you want to quieten the home crowd down as the visiting side in the opening stages of a game, Palace midfielder Chung-yong Lee gift-wrapped the first goal inside 3 minutes, with his terrible back pass playing in Chris Wood to slot past Hennessy for the opener. It was the worst possible start for Palace, and certainly not the way the South Korean would have wanted to mark his landmark 100th appearance in the Premier League. Number 2. When your luck is out. Crystal Palace got into several good positions in an attacking sense and had plenty of chances, with Scott Dan seeing 2 shots cleared of the line and James MacArthur, Christian Benteke and Dan all going close with headers. But the ball just did not quite drop for the Eagles when bobbling about in the box, and their luck definitely evaded them. Number 3. A gamble. With Crystal Palace chasing the game, you looked at Frank de Boer to try and change things to make a difference. Step forward 19-year-old Levi Lekima. It was a shock for many Palace fans to see him handed his Premier League debut in such a vital game, and given the situation, but it was a very bold move by de Boer. He has a history of giving youth a chance at Ajax, but the gamble did not quite pay off on this occasion. Number 4. How did it not go in? Just as it looked like the game had gone for the Eagles, with Palace pressing forward in the closing stages, they had a golden opportunity to equalise with Yohan Cabaye putting it on the plate for Scott Dan. But somehow the central defender, playing as a makeshift striker in the dying stages, put his header wide of the mark from just 2 yards out. It was the opportunity Palace had been crying out for, and it wasn't taken. And number 5, an unwanted record. By losing without scoring for the 4th time in a row, Crystal Palace become the first side in 93 years, and with it the first team in the history of the Premier League, to lose 4 top-flight matches at the start of the season. Now I'm going to move on to the player ratings, but before I do that, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at eCrystalPalace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do also feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions, share your opinions with other fans, and also share any views or any pictures you have which you think that other fans may like to see. And also, another good place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the video on YouTube, then do drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, rating the players from 1 to 10 of how you thought they performed throughout the game, along with your views from the game. And that's so that other people who come to the video, they can listen to my opinion and read your opinion so they can see what other fans thought, but also it's so that me looking back at the video, not only can I look back on what I thought of the game, I can also look back and look at what other fans had to say about the game. And that's another thing you can do in a Facebook group, which is really good as well. You know, you can have discussions with fans, which is something I really like to do. I like to hear other opinions from other fans, from albeit from the starting 11 to the stuff at the club about the managerial situation. All of this stuff I do really like to have discussions with other fans. So if you do want to do that, then drop a comment below in the YouTube video. No, obviously if you do want to follow any of these social media pages or join the Facebook group, then you'll find all the links in the description below. But before we start and move on to the player ratings and I give you a little summary of the game, I am going to say now, like a sort of disclaimer, that I'm actually recording this on Monday evening, and obviously the news broke at about 12 o'clock today on Monday that Frank de Boer has actually been sacked. Now I'm going to do a separate reaction video on the Frank de Boer sacking, and possibly if we appoint a manager in the next few days, then I'll do it together and I'll do a reaction to the sacking and the reaction to a new manager coming in. So what I'm going to do in this podcast, I'm going to review the game as if Frank de Boer is still the manager, so I can talk about what he could do to improve, what the team could do to improve. But then what I'm going to do in the next coming days, maybe, you know, tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, whenever I feel, well, when I've sort of digested all this information, all of this stuff that's happening with Palace, then I'll go back and I'll record another podcast, whether it be discussing just de Boer or whether it be discussing de Boer and a new manager. So that's just a disclaimer before I start the video, that I'm actually going to talk when I'm reviewing the game as if Frank de Boer is still the manager, and then in the coming days I'll do a separate video talking obviously about him being sacked. But just to talk about the game as a whole, I think, you know, if you look at the game as a whole, there was quite a lot of difference between the two sides, because Palace were drastically better than Burnley. We had, I believe it was 65% possession. We had 23 shots compared to Burnley's 2 or 4, I believe it was. So we were dominating Burnley, but it was one catastrophic error defensively which caused us to lose the game. You know, if Chung-yong Lee doesn't give that awful back pass from 50 yards and doesn't try to pass it back to Hennessy and just keeps hold of possession. If he doesn't do that back pass, we actually started the game quite well, you know, from the kickoff. If that mistake hadn't have happened, we probably would have gone on to lose the game. Or maybe because we had the confidence of not being a goal down, we could have even gone on to win the game. But I've said this already, you know, it was probably, people may criticise him, but this was the best performance we've seen from Palace this season. And obviously Frank de Boer's being sacked because the performance wasn't good enough, because at the end of the day, football is a results game. But I personally think this was the best performance we saw throughout the season. The team actually had fight in it. It had a purpose. We had a system which worked for our players. You know, we went back to the back four. So everything looked good other than the result. But obviously that wasn't enough to stop Frank de Boer from getting sacked. And to be honest, I'm looking back at the game. I think it's a game that many fans, including myself, will look back at it and go, actually, we should have really got a point. And I think that's something that quite a lot of fans do agree with. You know, if Lee Chung-yong doesn't make the mistake, Wood doesn't score, and maybe we go with a 0-0, and that would have been a good result in my eyes. But, you know, once again, Frank de Boer did prove he was willing to change the system. You know, he scrapped his back three, went to a back four, we played better, and, you know, there were loads of positives. The fact that when we changed the system, we played better, but obviously, you know, Frank de Boer wasn't given any more time. He got sacked because we lost another game, and now we're on search for another manager. And if you look back at the last 3 seasons we've had, or the last sort of 5 seasons, we've had about 6 or 7 managers, so that's quite concerning. And any manager who's looking at coming to the club, they're not really going to be, you know, they're not really going to look at the club and go, this is amazing, because they've seen how bad our track record is with managers. But as a game as a whole, if you look back at the game, we played really well in the game, we dominated the game, but once again it was one silly stupid mistake which caused us to lose the game. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to move on to my normal part of the podcast, which is the player ratings, and I'm going to start with the goalkeeper Wayne Hennessy, who I am going to give a 6. Apart from picking the ball out of the net, he had a quiet first half. In no man's land for Wood's opener, but wasn't given much choice with Lee's horrible back pass. Not given much else to do apart from a few kicks and more back passes. Wasn't given much to do in the second half either, but did well to parry away a Bradley curler and pulled off a brilliant diving save to deny Wood. So obviously Wayne Hennessy here, I've given him a 6, and quite a lot of fans may disagree with me, but I think, you know, I thought Hennessy had an alright game, because although, you know, Burnley only had 2 shots on goal, the shots they did have other than the goal, you know, Wayne Hennessy was able to deal them. So in the first half, the first thing Hennessy had to do within the first 3 minutes was to pick the ball out of the net. So that was the main thing he done in the first half. And if you look back at the goal, obviously I've already said this already, Lee Chung-yong, terrible, horrible back pass, and obviously he's passed the ball back to try and get to Hennessy from 50 yards, hasn't worked, Woods intercepted it, and because Hennessy's, you know, thinking the defender's going to run and, you know, try and make a tackle, Hennessy's sort of charged forward, because that hasn't happened, because the defenders haven't moved forward. He's charged forward, and what Wood has done, a really good goal from Wood, I can't take that away from him, curled it around Hennessy, but at the end of the day he was in no man's land. You know, the defence were too high up the pitch, so there was no one there to get back and try and stop him, so it was a one-on-one situation, and obviously Hennessy tried to make a dive for it, but if you look back at the replays, it's him looking to head the ball away. But, you know, I can't really blame Hennessy for the goal, because, you know, he's obviously one-on-one with the keeper, or one-on-one with the striker. He's thought, okay, maybe I can make myself big and try and dive for it, by which time, you know, Wood's been able to curl it around him. But I don't think he was given much choice. You know, we can't really blame him for the goal, because I think 90% of the goal we conceded was down to Lee Chung-yong. You know, maybe 5% is to do with the fact that our defensive line, so our 2 defenders in Fosu Mensah and Scott Dan, was too high up the pitch, and maybe 5%, even less than that maybe it's even 3% and 7% to the defenders. But let's say it's 5% fault of Wayne Hennessy. It's probably because instead of staying on his line and trying to charge at him from a further distance, which would give him a little bit more time to make a dive in the right direction, he obviously steamed quite forward. But other than the goal we conceded, obviously we pushed on as soon as we conceded a goal to try and get something from the game. And because we sort of packed Burnley in their own half and they couldn't really get anywhere, obviously Wayne Hennessy didn't really have much to do other than a few back passes where we were passing the ball back to him and he was clearing it long up the pitch. And I must say, his distribution in this game was absolutely fantastic. Whenever, you know, people may criticise him, but he's got a very, very long kick on him, and the majority, maybe 80%, 90% of his goal kicks or free kicks did hit the head of Christian Benteke, so showing that he's got a little bit more accuracy than people may give him credit for. Now, much like in the first half, he didn't really have much to do in the second half, but the two notable saves he did make from Burnley's 4 shots on goal, Bradley had a curler, Hennessy was able to make a save, and then there was another diving save late on in the game where Wood had another shot, and obviously Hennessy was able to clear. But I've given him a 6 because I don't think we can really fault him for the goal we conceded. And like I said, I think maybe 5, maybe 3% of that goal we can blame on him, because I think the blame really is on Lee because of his horrible back pass. But, you know, even though we look back at the game, other than the goal we conceded, which I've already said is not his fault, I thought he had an overall average game. He made saves when he had to, and considering Burnley only had 4 shots on goal, it just proved that Hennessy actually done his job for once. He was there to make the saves which you would expect him to do. Now to move on to the right back Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 5. Found life difficult with Bradley and the overlapping Ward, and found himself overrun at times at right back. Tried to get forward in the second half, but gave the ball away too many times. Couldn't get forward enough, with Townsend doing most of the work on the wing. So Joe Ward here, I've given him a 5, and much like his performances in the last few weeks, it was a very under par performance from him, and considering how he's declined over the last few seasons, this was another game which just showed that he's not quite up to the quality that he was 2 or 3 seasons ago. But just to talk about the game as a whole and how he did struggle in the game and why I've given him the 5. Personally, looking back at the game, I thought that Bradley playing on the wing for Burnley, and also his namesake Ward playing also, I believe in the Burnley defence, playing at left back. I personally thought these players were running rings around Joe Ward, because he did find it quite difficult to mark Bradley and also Ward, and sometimes, you know, I did say this just a moment ago, he found himself overrun at times at right back. So although he was alright in the game and he didn't do anything wrong, he still did struggle quite a lot, especially with Bradley and obviously the quality of Ward as well. And one thing I did pick up, especially from the other Ward's performances from Burnley, is he kept putting in crosses in, because he knew that when he could run past Joe Ward was the weakness in the team, so he kept attacking Joe Ward and putting in crosses. And Ward, unlike what he'd done a few seasons ago, he weren't really that aware defensively, and he wasn't blocking all these crosses. So Ward was loving that, putting all these overlapping runs around Joe Ward and putting in all these crosses. And obviously, luckily for us, none of the crosses got to anyone or got to the head of anyone to score. But the point is, Joe Ward really should be man marking quite close to the man on the wing, making sure he can't do overlapping runs and making sure he can't put crosses into the box. So in that respect, I think he did quite struggle. And that was mainly in the first half. And in the second half, obviously, the whole team improved tenfold. But Joe Ward especially, you know, he tried to get forward. He tried to get involved with the team. He tried to push for us to obviously go on and get the equaliser and possibly get the win if we could. But obviously, one of the downsides of Joe Ward as a player is that he hasn't got much pace. So when he was going forward, he did lose the ball quite a lot. And really, that's not what you want from a defender. You want a defender to, if they are going to go forward, you want them to be comfortable on the ball. And that is something that Joe Ward was. And obviously, because he couldn't get forward, it meant that on that sort of right-hand side, Andros Townsend was doing most of the work. And I'll go on to talk about Townsend later on. But I personally thought Andros Townsend was one of our star players, and he was doing exactly what the ball, or what the players would want from a teammate, and also what the ball wanted from the team, someone to put crosses in, and that's something that Joe Ward didn't do. So going forward, Joe Ward wasn't fast enough, kept giving the ball away, and also didn't attempt to put crosses in, which something that Andros Townsend did playing further up the field, and obviously he went on to have an even better game. But you know, I've given Joe Ward a 5, another under par performance and an underwhelming performance, knowing that the quality he's got. But I've said this in past weeks, you know, it's quite sad to see the decline in the way he's been playing, but maybe he's just not quite up to the Premier League quality anymore. Obviously, moving on now to the centre-back, Timothy Fosu-Mensah, who I'm going to give a 6. Calm at the back, nothing out of place in the first period. Not an easy game at all against the big men Woods and Vokes, but held his own at times. Continued to be at ease on the ball. So Fosu-Mensah here, I've given him a 6, and I was debating before recording the podcast and looking back at the game, I thought maybe I could give him a 7, because I thought, looking back at the game, I thought he was really calm on the ball, really composed, and dealt with, you know, the quite physical threat of Woods and Vokes really well. But I've decided to go against that because obviously because the goal we conceded was, I said it's 90% Lee's fault, but also maybe 5-7% of that fault could be on the defenders. And the reason I want to blame the defenders only a little bit is obviously the back pass was the main problem, but the other problem is the back line, our centre backs were playing so far forward, they were almost at the halfway line, meaning that when the ball got put through to Wood to go through and go and score, there was no one there because they were playing so far forward that by the time they were chasing back, Wood had gone on to score. So looking back at the game, I think that positionally they need to be more aware, obviously talking about Stan and Fosu-Mensah, to know that when we're in possession you can't go too far up the pitch, because if something like that happens and a teammate from the opposition goes on the run and goes on the counter attack, you're not going to be there. So that's what I think the team need to improve on, and that's why I've given Fosu-Mensah a 6 instead of a 7, is purely because the defensive awareness, not knowing that when you're going forward you need to be aware of your surroundings and actually make sure you track the run of Woods and not let him get past you, by which time, even though you've got pace, you can't get back and defend him. But in the first half, other than the goal, nothing out of place. It was really solid throughout. And also the thing that I quite liked is, although we were playing 4 at the back, we were still trying to play a little bit expansive. And what Fosu-Mensah did, he's quite a powerful player. He'd drive forward in the team, carry the ball up from the defence and try and create something. And that's something we're missing from someone like Scott Dann. You know, Fosu-Mensah picks up the ball, drives forwards, put these lovely crosses forward, lovely balls forward, and they were all, much like Hennessy's goal kicks, they were all very accurate. But just looking back at the game, it's not an easy game. You know, we know the quality Woods and Vokes have, but I think, considering he's only, I think he's 20, 18, considering how young he is, I thought it was a very composed performance from him. And I've said this already, I was going to give him a 7, and that just highlights that actually, on the day, he was probably one of Palace's better players. And, you know, we've seen this every week. He continues to be at ease on the ball. He's very calm at the back. So hopefully, obviously Frank de Boer's been sacked now, but hopefully the new manager can utilise him. And I personally think, bring Saka into the side, move Fosu-Mensah to right back, because he's got the physical attributes. He can cross the ball. He can, you know, bring the ball forward. So I think he'll be a perfect fit for right back. But do comment below what you think of Fosu-Mensah's performance, and also whether you think he'll be better suited to the right back role given his physical attributes. Obviously moving on now to his centre back partner, and that is Scott Dann, who I'm also going to give a 6. Posed more of a threat up front than he did at the back, having drilled a shot that was cleared off the line early on. Solid and vocal at the back. Had a solid second half too, to be fair to him, and had a second chance cleared off the line late on, and missed a massive chance for the equaliser right at the death by heading wide from close range. So obviously Scott Dann here, I've given him a 6, and I'm not really going to talk too much about his defensive performance, because much like Fosu-Mensah, he didn't do much wrong other than, you know, being too high for the goal, and there wasn't really much to highlight about his defensive performance, because I thought he'd done pretty well. But the thing that really impacted on Dan's performance is the fact that he actually posed more threat when he was moved up front, when we moved to sort of a 3 at the back again, essentially, with obviously Dan playing up front, so almost like a 3-5-2, but, you know, with a few players filling into the back four. But whatever the formation is, I'm not sure. But we played with Scott Dann up front when we were trying to push for the equaliser, you know. And if you look at it, if you look at our 23 shots we had, quite a lot of them came from Scott Dann. You know, in the first half, quite early on, just after we conceded, punching, putting a lovely delivery into the box. Scott Dann, an exquisite touch to get the ball down, control it, had a shot, it was cleared off the line really early on. And in the second half as well, we had another one cleared off the line, which is a very similar one. A corner came in, this time from the opposite corner, got whipped in, he controlled it really well, had a shot, it was also cleared off the line. So 2 chances where he's had great control and a shot. So unlike Benteke, I think that in this game, Scott Dann's shooting was better than the striker. And then, you know, late on in the game, there was a really, really massive chance where we could have snatched the game in the dying embers of it. Obviously, chipped ball over the top to Benteke. He headed it to Cabaye. Cabaye ran to the byline, whipped the ball back, and obviously Scott Dann headed it wide from really, really close range. He was like 2 yards out. And if that had gone in 1-1, we would have taken the draw. And maybe I'll be standing here today talking about the fact that De Boer is still in the job. But I think, looking back at that chance, yes, people criticised Dan for missing it, and you could see how disappointed he was. And even if you look at the thumbnail of the YouTube video, you can see the disappointment on his face for missing that chance, but really we shouldn't have to be relying on putting the centre-back up front to score a goal in the dying embers of the game. So that's why I'm not really going to criticise him too much, and that's why I've given him the 6, is because although he missed the other 2 chances, we had 23 shots in the game, so we shouldn't be relying on our centre-back to score. We should be relying on our strikers and our wingers to actually take one of them 23 chances. But like I said, if you look back at the replay, it is quite a difficult header. Yes, it's a really good ball right on the plate from Kabai, but if you look back at it, there's a player coming across Scott Dan. He's gone to head it in, but obviously as the ball's come in front of him, he's hit it with the wrong side of his head, and instead of it going to his right hand side, he went to the left and went out for a goal kick. So in that respect, yes, you could say he's done better, but I don't think he really we can really criticise him for that, because it's not really his fault that we have to put him up front to try and get something from the game. But I've given him a 6. I thought he had a fairly alright performance, and like I said, much like Fossey Mensah, didn't really have too much to do defensively other than the goal, which I've said maybe 5-6% of it is actually his fault. But overall in the game, should have really taken some of them chances, but I'm not really gonna blame him too much for them. Now to move on to the left back Jeffrey Slop, who I am going to give a 6. Got forward from left back as much as possible, but didn't manage to have an impact and mistimed a few tackles, allowing Goodmanson to get away. Found himself free in the box at one point and went to pull the trigger, but took too long with Phil being snuffed out. Blazed the best chance of the game over from the edge of the box in the second half. So obviously Jeffrey Slop here, I've given him a 6, and much like Scott Dan and Timothy Fossey Mensah, and maybe Ward to a certain extent, I don't think defensively we can really put much blame on Jeffrey Slop in this game, because I thought, considering he hadn't played this season and he came in for Van Aanholt into the starting 11, I thought he put himself about really well and actually showed De Boer, who obviously we now know is sacked, but it showed him that actually maybe Slop should have been starting instead of Van Aanholt. Now to talk about something which Ward did struggle to do at right back, which something that Slop did in this game, and that was getting forward. And obviously with Slop having the pace he has, but having a little bit more physicality than Joe Ward has, it meant that Slop was able to push forward as much as possible, and whenever he got the ball, instead of trying to cross it in or, you know, pass it back to Wayne Hennessy like, say, Joe Ward does, he'd use his pace to drive forward, get forward as much as possible, and have an impact. And that's really good, you know, the fact that because we were so attacking in this game, he was one of the key components in that, because he was using his pace to get in behind and overlap with the winger, who on the left hand side was Lee for parts of the game. Now obviously if you're going so far forward as a left back, or as a right back incidentally, obviously that's going to leave space in behind, and a few times, you know, with Slop pushing forward, he did let Goodmanson get away, but ultimately for us it didn't really come to anything. So although he was really good offensively, there was just a few times, not as much as Van Aanholt was in games gone past, but there was a few times where Slop should have really stayed back and, you know, tried to defend, but instead he used his pace, and then obviously he had to get back. But because he's got the pace, he's got the ability and the strength to actually get back and catch up with the attacker, which means that even if he's let his man run past him on the overlap, he can still catch up with him and go on to, you know, either clear the danger or block the cross. And certainly that's what we did see in certain parts of the game where we were chasing a Burnley attack. You know, Slop would be one of the first players to actually use his pace to run back and defend it. Now there was a few times where, obviously I've said already, he was on the overlap, he found himself free in the box, obviously got given the ball back on the 1-2, obviously went to pull the trigger, he took a bit too long with his shot, obviously because he's not naturally a finisher, so he took too long, and obviously he got snuffed out, the ball got cleared away. But the fact that he's able to get into the box and have 1-2s and get on the end of chances like that is a positive, and something which we've seen from Van Aanholt at his time at Sunderland and at the end of last season. We haven't quite seen it this season, and that's something that if you compare Slop's performance to Van Aanholt's in the past 3 games, that's why Slop's performance was better. Now in the second half it was much the same, trying to push forward as much as possible, trying to create something from the game, and the best chance really, I talked about Scott Dan's chance where we say yes he should be heading that in, but Slop had a chance as well where the ball came to him on the edge of the box. He could have had time to, you know, have a touch and then shoot, but what he done, he hit it on the half volley, didn't quite connect with the ball right, got his foot too much underneath the ball and skied it just over the bar. But in that instance, yes, there's 3 or 4 players around him, but if he had taken just a split second to take one little touch, and even if he rolled it across the floor, because if you look back at the goalkeeper, if he had rolled it across the ground, there was easily space there for it to slip into the bottom corner, but I'm not really going to criticise him too much because, like I said, he's not really a clinical finisher. And although he did play as striker for Leicester, I don't think he's got, you know, the clinical... Yeah, he's not as clinical, let's say. I don't think there's a word to describe that in another way, but he's not as clinical as, say, Benteke is, so you can't really expect him to score from that. But if he does score from that, you know, it's 1-1, the equaliser, and maybe that pressure which we were putting on at the end of the game could have actually come to something. But, you know, if you look back at that try, I can't really blame him for missing that because there's 3 players around him, and he's obviously thought at the split second, okay, let's just hit this first time, when in reality he could have had 2 or 3 seconds just to take a touch and obviously have a shot on goal. But really, I think a 6 is a really fair result for Jeffrey Slupp, and considering he's just come back into the side, hasn't really played much this season, I thought he put himself about really well. Obviously, moving on now to the captain, Jason Puncheon, who I am going to give a 4. The usual from Punch, saw the ball a lot but struggled to get things going. No major influence on the game in the first half. Gave away possession with some sloppy passes in the second half, but did at least try to play 10 yards further forward, which helped Palace press the clouds a bit. Had a well hit shot blocked at the start of the second half. So obviously Puncheon here, I've given him a 4, and once again, like we've been saying for the last 3 weeks, it was a very disappointing performance from the captain. Now, I did say in this little summary that it was the usual from Punch, so saying that although he gets a lot of the ball and he's really good at, you know, containing possession, keeping hold of possession, when it comes to doing something with that possession and doing something when he has the ball, he didn't really do anything with it. And that's what happened. You know, we had loads of the ball, we were dominating possession, like I said already, 65% possession, we were dominating that, but, you know, especially Puncheon weren't doing anything with it, and he struggled to really get going because he had all the possession, he had the chances, and he had the opportunity to do something for the team, help the team, but instead he really struggled to get started. And if you look back at the first half as a whole, considering he's the captain and you would expect him to be one of the more leadership players, one of the more better players on the field, he had no major influence. So you'd normally expect your captain to be putting himself about a bit, trying to get something for the team, but in the first half we didn't really quite see that influence and that intensity from Puncheon. Now in the second half, you know, much like the first half, he got quite a lot of the ball and he still struggled to do things with it and get started, but what he started to do in the second half, which is why I've given him the 4, is he kept giving away possession quite a lot more than he has been doing in the last few games. And obviously Burnley were playing quite deep at times. I know they were trying to counter us, but that doesn't, you know, you can't forgive Puncheon really for giving the ball away so much, because if they pass it out to someone like Goodmanson or Ward, who play on the flanks for Burnley, they could punish us by putting in crosses into the area for Woods and Vokes. But, you know, even though he gave away the ball a few times, unlike in the first half where he was playing quite deep, almost as a Milivojevic role from last season, he pushed further forward, about 10 more yards he was playing forward, and that obviously helped Palace to put on a bit more pressure, and that's why we dominated the game, because we were putting on the pressure on Burnley. But obviously, because he didn't have real influence, even though he was playing further up the pitch, when he had the ball he weren't really doing anything with it. And the final thing really about his performance, other than the fact that he had possession, done nothing with it and then gave it away, he did have a shot, well taken shot in my opinion. I believe it was just inside the area, or just outside. I can't remember which one it is looking back at it, but he had the shot. It was a really well hit shot, and obviously it got blocked, and that was just at the start of the second half. So he came out in the second half rejuvenated slightly, but then much like he's been this season, he starts the game the first 5-10 minutes well, and then just completely dies out. And that's what we saw from this game, and it's really disappointing and really quite sad to see the decline in Puncheon's performances. But obviously what I was thinking during the game is, why play Puncheon? Just because he's the captain doesn't mean we have to play them, and that's a fair point. I've seen loads of people say that. And obviously Frank de Boer's gone now, but I'm sure Frank de Boer, having been at Ajax, the captain is someone who normally plays every game. So maybe he's brought that philosophy over here, and now he's gone. Maybe the new manager who comes in will see that actually, yeah, Punch can be a good captain, he can be a good leader in the dressing room, but maybe on the pitch we need to drop him so he can get his confidence back and obviously go on and improve. Because I'm sure, in my opinion, that Puncheon could be a really great leader in the dressing room. He can, you know, motivate the players, he can get the youth players involved, you know, try and get the best out of every player, teach them the history of the club. But on the field, he isn't quite having the influence that he would have liked. And I'm sure, looking at the bench, Milivojevic, who we now know probably had a falling out with Frank de Boer, so now he's gone. you know, that's not a problem. But Milivojevic could have come into the side. Jaro Riedewald, obviously his first game back since his injury, he could have easily filled in that punching role, because when he came off the bench, I thought he was absolutely fantastic. But once again, another disappointing performance from the captain, and a 4 for him. Obviously, moving on now to the midfield, starting with James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 6. One of the few Palace players to try and get things to happen, and was unlucky to see a header flash wide in the opening moments of the game just past the post. That hard work continued into the second half as he tried to drive forward with the ball and make things happen. Unlucky not to be on the score sheet. Was substituted for Riedewald late on. So obviously James McArthur here, I did say he's the first player in the midfield, but obviously Punchin was playing in a midfield role. But I thought McArthur's role in the midfield was more crucial than, say, Punchin's was, because Punchin was playing quite deep at times, so almost like a CDM, and then in the main midfield, so a centre mid / attacking mid position, obviously McArthur and Cabaye were playing there. But I've given McArthur a 6, because if you look back at his performance, I think he was one of the few Palace players that actually tried to make things happen. He tried to get something for the team. You could see the effort and the commitment he was putting in on the field, with his tackles, with his chasing down, with his harrying. So he was doing everything right in the game, and he was quite unlucky, you know, not to get something from the game. He's unlucky to be on the losing side, because a performance like this, where you give your all, you try to make things happen, is what you would expect from a player. If we had lost this game, or if we lost any of the games, 4 games this season, and we put in a solid performance, every player, you know, put their 100% in, then we wouldn't be complaining and discussing this. But McArthur is one of these players who's come out with the least criticism, because in my opinion, I thought, looking back at the game, that he was one of the players who actually tried to make things happen. Now, and a great example of that was in the first half, just after Burnley scored, we went up the other end. Obviously, a corner, I believe it was a corner or a cross came in from the right hand side, I believe it was. McArthur went to header it, and it just went just wide. So if you're looking back at that chance, you know, we've just conceded a goal, and we've gone up the other end and just created another opportunity for ourselves. So that's just showing that even though we were 1-0 down, we still had the determination and that drive to actually go forth in the game and try and get something out of it. And I personally think that McArthur was quite key to that. Now, in the second half as well, obviously in the first half he had that headed chance, and other than sort of carrying the ball forward, he didn't really do much. In the second half, he sort of continued with that hard work, you know, chasing players down, trying to, you know, make sure that the Burnley players couldn't have any space, you know, making it a difficult a time for the Burnley players on the pitch. Now, obviously, with us chasing the game, we were trying to push forward. I thought McArthur carried the ball forward really well. There was a few times where he would make maybe 20 yards, and instead of just losing the ball, say someone like Punchin done, he'd either turn around and pass it back, or pass it sideways to someone who's in more space, let's say someone like Cabaye, and that's what he wanted to do. He didn't want to just give away the ball or pass it back. He would carry the ball forward 20 yards, and then instead of giving the ball away, which Punchin did, he'd actually try and do something with the ball, and that's what he done. He helped us drive forward, then he actually created meaningful chances, or created meaningful passes for other players on the field. And much like the first half, he tried to make things happen, and that's the main thing with his performance, and why I've given him a 6, is the fact that he tried, at least he tried to do something in this game. But the final thing, really, you know, he was unlucky to be on the score sheet, you know, playing sort of the Loftus-Cheek role that Loftus-Cheek's been playing the first 2 seasons of the game, I thought that McArthur playing sort of just in front of the midfielders, so i.e. in this game Cabaye, and just behind Benteke, he was playing that sort of attacking midfield role, and he was quite unlucky to be on the score sheet, because he had a few chances to have shots here and there. He obviously had a few headers which went just wide, so on another day maybe he would have scored that header and we'd be discussing a different story. But late on in the game, got substituted for Riedewald, and I already mentioned it with Punchin. I thought Riedewald came on and had a really good impact, but James McArthur a 6, a fair result. Obviously, moving on now to the other midfielder, and that is Young Cabaye, who I am going to give a 7. Neat and tidy, battled away. A busy performance in the middle of the park, and alongside McArthur was one of the few men working hard to get things going. Fairly impressive first half. Must have gotten in most tackles of any Palace player, with some robust challenges in the middle of the park, and was one of only a few with any urgency out there. Heavily involved as the game went on through the middle. So obviously Young Cabaye here, I've given him a 7, and considering this was one of his first starts of the season, I thought, much like someone like Jeffrey Slupp, I thought he put himself about a bit. And we have been discussing, you know, with the Huddersfield game, maybe someone like Punchin should be dropped and Cabaye brought in, because Cabaye's got the quality on the ball, and obviously Frank de Boer, he didn't really fancy Cabaye, but in this game he gave Cabaye a chance in the midfield three with Punchin and MacArthur, and obviously he showed his class. You know, obviously that's something that Frank de Boer's been missing, and hopefully the new manager who comes in will, you know, utilise Cabaye, because if you get the best out of Yohan Cabaye, he can be an absolutely class player on his day, and that's something that Allardyce did last season. He got the best out of Yohan Cabaye. But in this game, something which we had been missing against Swansea, against Liverpool, against Huddersfield, we were missing someone who battled away, someone who was really neat and tidy on the ball, someone who was really professional about what they did, and someone with a bit of class. And that's what we've been missing. You bring Cabaye in and he had exactly that. You know, on the ball, he was very neat, his touches here and there, his passing and his crossing ability was fantastic. He was tidy as well, not giving the ball away, and also, much like MacArthur, he battled well. He'd done everything he could for the team and tried to make things happen. Now, the word I did use to describe, and this is something I've used to describe Punchin last season when he was on his day, when he was playing really well, and that is that it was a busy performance. You know, Cabaye was all over the pitch. Offensively, he was, like I said, being neat and tidy, trying to create chances against the opposition. But also defensively, he'd get back, and much like MacArthur, he'd try and do that high press. So I thought he had a really busy performance, and considering he was playing in the centre of midfield, that's a really important role, because if you can't control the midfield, then you can't control the game and you can't control possession. And I think alongside MacArthur, they were the hardest working men. They were trying to make things happen and trying to at least get something out of this game. And talking about his first half, there wasn't anything of note, like any shots on goal or any missed headers, but I think it was just a fairly impressive. So his overall first half game play was actually quite impressive, and then in the second half he continued with, you know, battling away, trying to get something from the game. And like I said, I described his first half performance as a busy performance. Second half was as well, and if you look back at the game and look back at some of the challenges he made when we were on the back foot and when we had to defend Burnley's counter-attacks, he probably got the most tackles of any Palace player. And you would normally expect, you know, your defensive mid, who in this game was Punchin, or do you expect your defenders to make the most tackles? But I personally think, looking back at the game, Yohan Cabaye was probably the person with the most tackles, and some of them were quite robust challenges. So that just shows that the class he's got, not only going forward with his passing ability, but also going back as well. He can make these robust challenges, break up a Burnley counter-attack, and then help us, you know, to counter forward again. And that's something that I liked about his performance. He had a bit of urgency, so whenever he saw Burnley on a counter-attack, he didn't sort of ponder about. He made sure he could put in that robust challenge, stop the counter-attack there and then obviously, because he's got a bit of urgency and we're chasing the game, he'd try and create something more going forward. And obviously, as the game went on, as we were going into sort of the 50th, maybe a bit later, maybe the 70th, 80th minute, obviously where we're trying to chase the game, we're really at this point under control. We pinned Burnley in their own half. We're trying to put in balls as much as we can in the box. And then Yohan Cabaye, in that sort of last 10 minutes, his productivity increased. He was heavily involved, and he was one of the main men as we, you know, tried to press for the equaliser, and especially, like I said, through the middle. That's the key point in my opinion. He bossed that midfield, and if you look back at the stats, and especially whoscored.com stats, really good insight into the game. If you look back at their stats, Yohan Cabaye was the best midfielder in that game out of the Burnley and Palace players. It's purely because of how well he controlled the midfield. But the final thing, really, before I go on to move on to talk about the attack, was actually he did have a shot late in the second half. I believe it was probably about the 70th, 75th minute. He obviously picked up the ball on the edge of the area, had a shot. It was curling, much like the one against Arsenal last season, curling to go into the top corner. And obviously, I believe it was Pope in the Burnley goal. He obviously made a really good save. He made a couple of saves, really, but he made that particular save. And obviously, if that had gone in, it would have been 1-1, a different story. Because that just shows, you know, I've talked about Cabaye, how he's been busy, how he's been pressing players down, how he's been passing the ball. But when he did have that opportunity, unlike Jeffrey Schlupp, to shoot, he actually took his chance, had a shot, and it was a really great save from the keeper. But I've said this already, I'll go on to talk about the man of the match and the best player later on in the podcast. But I would say he is up there, and that's why I've given him the 7, because I thought his performance was really good. Obviously, moving on now to the right winger, Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 7. Worked very hard and looked to get the ball down and whipped into the box, and he managed that a few times. As well as the few pop shots at the end of the first half that Pope held well. looked to be Palace's main source of creativity at times, and with Zaha still out, he had to step up. Tried his best in the second half to continue that and had a few shots from distance blocked. Delivered a superb ball in for Lekima at one point. He had a good game. So obviously Andros Townsend here, much like Yohan Cabaye, I thought he had a really good performance, and considering we lost the game, and I've mentioned this already quite a lot, we did deserve to win this game because we attacked well, we defended really well, and it was only one stupid mistake which led to us losing the game. And if you look back at our offensive play, Townsend was one of the better players, and obviously that's why I've given him the 7. But something that I really like about Townsend's, the way he plays, is the fact that he works hard. He's one of these players with a really good work ethic, and even if he isn't playing to his best ability, he's always trying for the team. He's always chasing down players, always looking to put a cross into the area, always cutting inside and having shots, and we saw that once again in this game. But in the first half especially, I thought, looking back at his performance, he always tried to, get the ball down on his feet, dribble past a few players, use his pace to get past them, and then what he would do is whip the ball into the box. And, especially in the first half, he actually managed that quite a few times, and, that's the thing that the Boer tried in this game. And obviously, if we get a new manager, say someone like Roy Hodgson, he plays quite direct football, so maybe Townsend will like that sort of approach. But under Frank de Boer, he tried to, not play as expansive as we did against Swansea last week, but he also didn't want to play, too direct. So he sort of had an in-between thing, and Townsend was one of these players who actually really benefited from this system, because he was able to pick the ball up from someone like Cabaye or MacArthur from the midfield, who was able to dribble past a few players, bring it down at his feet, and then whip a ball into the box. And I thought he'd done that really well. And I'll go on to talk about in the second half what his crosses did come to. And obviously we know he's good at cutting inside. There was a few chances towards the end of the first half where we had a few shots. A few of them obviously got blocked by defenders and the ball went out. But there was a few chances where actually it was on target. And considering we had 23 shots on goal, it just proves that quite a lot of them were from Townsend, because he was, trying to create things and make things happen. But just to, one in particular was he had a shot from the edge of the area. It was destined to go into the top corner, and obviously Pope, who came on for Tom Heaton in the game, he was able to hold the ball really well, and obviously we were able, to start up the attack again and go forward. But that's something that other players like Puncheon didn't do in this game. They didn't seize their opportunities, they didn't go out there and try and create something from the game, and this is something that Townsend did, because if you look at all his time on the ball, so all the time he had possession, unlike Puncheon, who was just sort of holding the ball, passing it back, when Townsend had the ball, he was either looking to cut inside, he was either looking to cross the ball in, or, to dribble past and get the ball into the area. So overall, I thought first half of performance was really well. And in the game as a whole, he was our main source of creativity. He was the only player really on the field, other than Fosu-Mensah, who had the pace. And with Fosu-Mensah playing in defence, you can't really utilise his pace. So Townsend was the main source of creativity. And obviously when you've got a player as skillful as Wilfried Zaha and Loftus-Cheek out injured, there's got to be players who step up. And I certainly think, having given him a 7 in the last few games, I thought that Townsend was one of the few players who actually stepped up to the plate and made up for the loss of Wilfried Zaha, Loftus-Cheek, and soon Mamadou Sakho, because that quality that them three bring to the side, we certainly would have gone on to win this game if we had the quality of Sakho, Wilf and Loftus-Cheek in the side. Now, much like Cabaye, he carried on his work ethics, working hard into the second half. He tried his best, obviously, to continue, with how well he was playing in the first half. He had a few shots from distance once again, but unlike in the first half where one of them got saved by the goalkeeper, most of his shots from distance in the second half were blocked. But the one delivery which I did mention earlier on that I was going to go on to discuss was the ball for Lekima. So Lekima obviously came on for Chung-yong Lee. The first touch Lekima had on the ball, he almost scored from, and that all started from Andros Townsend. So Andros Townsend got the ball into the box, and Lekima went to have, I believe it was went to have a header, and obviously the header went just wider and just above the far right hand side. So that's just showing that when you do get balls into the box, players like Lekima, players like Benteke, if you give them the chances and you supply them with balls in the area, they can go on to score with them. And Lekima, obviously, he was sort of a last resort. We wouldn't normally have youth players coming on in such a crucial game. But good luck to Lakima, because I thought he came on, made a really good account of himself, showed great pace, also showed good tracking back, and certainly, considering how bad Lee played, who I'll go on to talk about, I thought Lakima came on and done himself proud. And if we've got players with Lakima's quality who can actually play first team football, then there's no reason why, you know, him and Townsend and Zaha linking up with Benteke, you know, I don't see how that could be a really good combination. But Andros Townsend, really, the only way to describe his performance was a good game. You know, he didn't have a fantastic game. He wasn't like how he was a few, you know, the end of last season where he was, you know, running past defenders left, right and centre. But he worked hard. He tried to get something from the team, for the team, and that's why I've given him a 7. But do comment below with your thoughts on him. And also, you know, it's rumoured that Roy Hodgson is going to be the Palace manager, and even though that may not be my first choice manager, and maybe, you know, people are not quite, they don't feel that he's the man to take Palace forward and or even save us this season, he actually got the best out of Andros Townsend when he was playing for England. And whether that was because of the backroom staff, but the few games that Hodgson did actually play Andros Townsend, Townsend was one of the better players for England. So maybe that's something that we've got to look forward to if, obviously, Roy Hodgson is confirmed as the manager. Obviously, moving on now to the biggest player, really, which we want to talk about, and that is Chung-yong Lee, who I'm actually going to give a 3 rating. Horror mistake to give Burnley the lead with his misplaced suicidal pass, which led to Chris Wood so early on. That impacted the rest of his performance as he tried to get into the game but with no end product. Taken off for Lakima in the second half. Now, just before I obviously said his name, I said he was the biggest player. He was the biggest talking point of this weekend. And you see other fans from other clubs laughing at us because they saw that actually we played really well, but the mistake from Lee was absolutely horrendous. You know, this guy's meant to be a Premier League footballer. He's meant to be in the national team for his own country, and yet he tries to attempt a back pass from 50 yards away in Burnley's own half. I've never seen a player do that, and when I saw the goal, I didn't actually, you know, scream or swear or anything. I actually laughed because I thought, what the hell are you doing passing it back from there? And the only way to describe that mistake is horror. It was horrible to see that mistake. It was absolutely a terrible back pass. It was suicidal. You know, back passes, you know, on the best of the days, they're quite dangerous. You don't know, because you can't see who's in the back line, it's quite dangerous because you don't know where the ball's going. But to attempt it from 50 yards, and he didn't even pass it to the defenders, he just passed it into nowhere. It wasn't going to Hennessy, it wasn't going to Dan, he just passed the ball there, and it was suicidal, because if he had the knowledge, he would have passed to maybe someone who was 2 yards away. But instead, he puts a lovely through ball to Chris Wood, and he scores. And, you know, that ball was really good. You know, if that was a Burnley player playing that ball, I'd go, fair play, you know, good on you, that was a really good through ball. But for Lee to do that is absolutely horrendous, and it's embarrassing. You know, people are now laughing at us, going, oh, who's that guy, that Asian guy, who put that back pass? And it's embarrassing to see that. And, you know, obviously with him playing as a winger, he hasn't really got pace to do that role anyway, so that's why he was sort of playing not as far forward as, say, Townsend was. So that's why he received the ball and had to back pass it. But the point is, that ball he put into Chris Wood was absolutely fantastic. Really curling effort, right to where he wanted it to be, but to the wrong player. It's a shame he couldn't do that on the other side of the pitch, because if he had done that and put in that sort of delivery to someone like Christian Benteke, we probably would have gone on to win this game, because that sort of delivery is something that, you know, Christian Benteke thrives on. But instead, Chung-yong Lee, with this horrible mistake, you know, he goes on and passes it to Chris Wood to score. And fair play to Chris Wood, I thought it was a really good finish. But like I've said with Wayne Hennessy and the defenders, I'm going to pin 90% of the blame on Chung-yong Lee for the goal. Like I said, about 7, maybe 5% of the blame is obviously going to go on the defenders for playing too high up the pitch. And obviously maybe 3, maybe 5% of the blame will go on Wayne Hennessy for coming off his line too quickly, but you can't really blame him for that. And obviously Lakima came on in the second half in the place of Chung-yong Lee, and from an attacking perspective we improved quite drastically because we had someone who's got a point to prove, someone who added a little bit more pace to this side, and someone who actually had an effect and had an impact on the team offensively. But Chung-yong Lee is really an embarrassment. This guy in pre-season looked like he wasn't interested. Against I can't remember who it was against, but it was a lower league side, so it was a conference side. He was playing for the under-23s and he looked disinterested. You know, there was 18, 19-year-olds performing better than someone who's meant to be a Premier League footballer. So I think he's a player on a decline, and maybe Palace should have accepted that transfer bid from Bolton to take him back there, because I don't think anymore he's a good enough quality player. But Chung-yong Lee, a 3 from him, could have given him a 2, because that horrible mistake he made with that suicidal back pass did actually go on to cost us the game. Obviously, moving on now to the striker and the final player of our starting 11, and that is Christian Benteke, who I am going to give a 5. Floated the header just wide immediately after Burnley's opener, but chances were few and far between for the big Belgian. Gave away more fouls in the second half than he did chances, and was eventually booked for it. Had a huge chance to level one late on, but Pope denied him with a superb save. So obviously Christian Benteke here, I've given him a 5, and although someone like Townsend and Kabay, I've given them 7s, and I've also given a few players 6s, the only reason I've given Benteke a 5 is A, because of how few chances he did create, but also just because how, you know, the continuous fouls he was doing. And I can't really blame him for not having as many chances as he would have liked, because players in the midfield like Kabay and Townsend, they weren't creating as many as we would have liked. But there was also a few chances that when he did get his chance to have a shot, there was one notably in the second half where he had a shot and it got saved by the keeper. On another day, he would have buried that bottom corner. But that's just to show that the reason I've given him a 5 is not necessarily because of how he performed, it's just the chances he missed. Because if you don't supply Christian Benteke, he doesn't play well. And, you know, in this game, he didn't play well. Yes, because, you know, he was not to his best of a form and he missed a few chances. But I personally think the main reason is that we didn't supply him enough. But early on, a ball came into the area, he had a header, it went just wide, and like I said, an instant impact from Burnley scoring a goal. We went up the other side of the field, and obviously Benteke put the header just wide, and once again that was from a cross from Andrew Townsend. And obviously chances were few and far between, so like I've said, I've given him a 5 because of the chances he missed, but also, you know, we can't really blame him too much, and I'm not going to criticise him too much, because he didn't really get supplied with enough opportunities to actually create attacking chances. And the other reason I've given him a 5 rather than a 6, because it's not his fault that he didn't have chances, is also the fact that he kept giving away fouls, and that's quite understandable. You get quite frustrated towards the end of the game, you're chasing the game, you're losing 1-0, you know, you're in danger of relegation, so it is, you can understand why he was, you know, giving away these fouls, because he was frustrated. But that's why I'm going to have to downgrade his performance, because really, you know, he's now 2 bookings away, so 2 yellow cards away from actually getting suspended for 1 game, obviously with the 5 yellow card rule. So yes, I can understand him getting quite frustrated and keep fouling people, but this is going to catch up with us considering we don't have an extra striker. So Benteke gets injured, we haven't got someone to replace him. You know, that's quite bad. And like I said, there was a few fouls he did, he got away with them the first few times, but eventually he got booked from it, and that's why I've given him a 5, because obviously, like I've said, the way he played and the chances he didn't take, but also purely because of all the fouls he gave away. And, you know, I could have given him a 6 because one chance he did have was a really great chance, but I've given him a 5 because he did miss his chance, and on another day he probably would have gone on to score this. And this is the thing, like I was talking about last season, it's all about confidence. If the team doesn't have confidence, if certain players don't have confidence, then they're not going to perform, and that's why I've given him a 5, and that's why in the last few games I've given him low ratings, is the fact that he hasn't got the confidence, he hasn't been given the opportunities to create chances, but also he hasn't taken the chances he had before. But the huge chance, so we talked about Scott Dan's chance to draw us level, Christian Benteke's chance late on, lovely one, it was like a 1-2 but times 3 between MacArthur, Townsend and Benteke. Got the ball to Benteke, he hit it, tried to curl it into the bottom corner with his right foot, and obviously a really great save from Pope. And obviously, you know, we didn't expect Pope to be as good as he was, considering he's Burnley's second choice goalkeeper, but he came on, done a respective job for Burnley, and unluckily for us, he made a superb save to stop Christian Benteke. Because on another day, if Benteke had the confidence and if Benteke had the players around him to create better opportunities, he probably would have gone on to score that chance. But I've given him a 5, and I keep mentioning this, giving him a 5, but I don't think his performance was necessarily terrible. But the fact that he missed these chances and the fact that he gave away too many fouls is why I've given him the 5. Obviously, moving on now to the 2 substitutes, Levi Lekima and Jaro Riedewald. So I'm not going to give a rating to Riedewald, obviously, because he came on quite late into the game for the last sort of 5-6 minutes. I'm not really going to give him a rating, but he came on for MacArthur. Obviously, with us chasing the game, you can't really expect a defensive midfielder to do much. And other than one misplaced pass, which didn't really cost us anyway, I thought he was really good. He brought us a bit of passing, which we'd been missing in the first half, and especially in the beginning of the second half. So he would pick up the ball from CDM, and his passing range was absolutely fantastic. He'd pass the ball to try and create attacking opportunities, and that's something that we had missed in the whole game. You know, someone like Punchin, very static in the midfield, someone like MacArthur playing advanced, so he couldn't pick up the ball from deep and go forward, and Young Kabai, you know, we know how good his passing range is, but he wasn't given the opportunity to do that because our main priority was to keep the ball on the floor, pass to Townsend, and cross the ball in. But Lekima as well, he didn't really have that much time to make an impact, but I'm going to give him a 6 rather than no rating, which I've given to Riedewald, because he did have a little bit of a chance to, you know, get something from the game. I thought, you know, considering it was his Crystal Palace first team debut, and also his Premier League debut, and he came on about the 60th minute. I thought, considering how bad Lee was, you couldn't really get any worse from that. And I thought Lekima put himself about a bit. You know, he had a really good chance to level it with a header. Like I've said, Townsend whipped the ball in. He headed just wide. And if that was Christian Benteke there, he probably would have scored it because Benteke's a much more experienced header of the ball. But the fact that Lekima, as an 18-year-old, has got the confidence to take that chance is, you know, credit to him. And obviously, I've said this already, a great ball from Townsend. So the fact that Lekima has already, at the age of 18, got that awareness to time his run really well, perfectly, to get on the end of a Townsend cross is credit to him. But like I said, these 2 subs, I personally would have brought them on the pitch earlier. So while I would have brought Lekima or Kai on at half time, I would have brought Riedewald on. Either started him or brought him on at half-time as well, because these 2 players did show that they can make an impact from the game, you know, with Lekima with his pace and obviously Riedewald with his passing ability. But, you know, that's the player review all done, and I'll go on to talk about in the next section of the podcast, you know, my man of the match. But really, you know, I don't really want to talk much more about the game because I've talked about the players' performances enough. But the only way to sum up this game is that an early catastrophic error, that proved to be the difference between the 2 sides. Because if it wasn't for that error and the fact that we were so dominant, you would have looked back at the game and go, that was a really good game from Palace. We played really well and we were unlucky to get a draw. But like I've said already, and I can't highlight it enough, one mistake has cost us in each of the games so far this season. And when will it stop? I don't know. So now to move on to my man of the match award. But before I do that and give you my man of the match and who I thought had the biggest influence on the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I've put forward for the man of the match award. Now normally every week I would put a Twitter poll out on Twitter so the people on the Palace Twitter could actually vote for who they thought their man of the match was. But after this game, because I was so disappointed and I couldn't really have the energy to do this after quite a disappointing result, I ended up not putting a poll out on Twitter. But I did actually pick 4 nominations on my own, which I personally thought, talking to a few people, I thought these 4 players put in the most effort throughout the game. Now, they were Andros Townsend, James MacArthur, Young Kabai and Jeffrey Slop. So just to go over why I've put these 4 players on there, and obviously, just to start off, obviously I thought that these 4 players, even though we lost the game, performed better than most of the team put together. These guys actually tried to get something from the game, and obviously that's why I've nominated them. But Andros Townsend, I've put him on here because offensively he was looking to pass the ball, he was looking to have shots, he was looking to cross the ball, he was looking to set up a counter-attack. So this guy was our best attacking threat without a doubt. He was trying to create stuff for the team and he looked like he had the determination to try and get something. The same can go for MacArthur and Kabai. You know, with these guys partnering up in the centre of midfield, they controlled the game really well, they bossed the midfield, they kept hold of possession, and unlike punching in the midfield, when they got the ball they would either pass it out, spread it out, and they would use the ball effectively. And then Jeffrey Schlupp, this is sort of someone who I've just put in here. I had to think of 4 people, and the reason I put Jeffrey Schlupp in here is just purely because of he hasn't played much this season. He came in and I thought he'd done a pretty decent job. He can come away with a little bit of credit because I thought offensively he was linking up with the attacking players really well. He used his pace to defend well, and you can't really fault him for the goal we conceded. So I think Jeffrey Schlupp should come away with a little bit of credit, considering he hasn't played this season. I thought he put in a really good performance. But for me personally, my personal man of the match out of these 4, I think there's only one winner, so that is Andros Townsend. So congratulations, Andros. You don't get a trophy or a certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on, despite another loss, our 4th loss in a row. I thought you put in a really, really good attacking performance, and if it weren't for him, we probably would have lost the game even more, because when you're on the back foot and you haven't got an attacking threat, the other team tend to exploit that and go on the counter-attack and try and kill you off. But because we had a sort of an attacking threat in Townsend, he kept putting on the pressure, kept trying to at least get something for us out of the game, and ultimately with his few shots on goal and his few crosses, he done exactly that to try and win us the game. But credit must go to MacArthur, Cabaye and Schlupp as well, because like I said, Cabaye and MacArthur controlling the midfield, being that attacking presence along with Townsend in the team, and obviously Jeffrey Schlupp for his pace, not only in attack but also in defence. So now you've had my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got an exclusive interview with Frank de Boer, Jason Puncheon and Levi Lukima following the game.
Levi, tell us a little bit of what was it like making your Premier League debut?
It was a good feeling, guys. I've dreamt as a kid since I was 8. I've worked hard for it, I've been patient, and I've been training well with the first team, and the manager gave me the nods up that I've been included in the squad, so it's a good feeling coming on. It's a very good feeling.
When did you say you've been training with the squad this week? Yeah. When did you know that you were going to be travelling up?
I think 2 days ago. Yeah, I found out 2 days ago, and it was a good feeling. Couldn't stop smiling for the whole day. But it was good for me to get a chance to show the manager what I can do and the fans. Obviously, I worked hard for this, and it came to that day today, and it was a good day for me.
What did he say to you when he told you you'd been selected? Was there a particular reason why you'd got in, working hard in training? And what did he say? Yeah, he said I've been working quite hard in training. I've been expressing myself in training. I've been confident. I've been trying to beat players, show the manager what I can do on the ball and for the team. And he said that for me to do it as soon as I get on the pitch, which was what I was trying to do. And what was it like, sort of yesterday travelling up with the first team squad, and then today, as you built up to kick off? Was you a little bit nervous? How was you dealing with it? To be honest, I've waited for this time for a long time, so I've decided to to not be nervous, just be confident and believe in my ability. But it was a good feeling as well. Like at first, in the beginning, I thought I was quite nervous, but I thought to myself, "Come on, it's your chance now. It's your time for you to show the Palace fans and the manager what you can do." So before I got on, I thought to myself, "It's my time to show the manager what I can do." And what did he say to you as you saw your number up to come on? He said to me, "Keep working hard." He said, "You've showed me in training what you can do, and just keep being players and try and get crosses in the box." Which what I was trying to do when I got on. The match itself, obviously, we had so many chances. It's disappointing to be going back to London with no points. Yeah, to be honest, it's a mixed day for me. Obviously making my Premier League debut, but it would have been better if we got at least a draw away. Obviously, Burnley are a good team. We came here knowing that what we expect from them. So for us not come away with at least a point, because I think second half we were all over them. So for us not come away with a point, it's quite disappointing. But it's the only way for us to fix up and try and get a point at least next week against Southampton, or get 3 points.
Jason, is there a feeling that you're not quite sure how you didn't win that?
Yeah, it's very difficult to take. So got punished for one mistake. But I think we've had chances to obviously at least come away with a point. I think on another day we would have, and if not got the 3.
With all greatest respect to Scott Downey, he's a centre back. Did they fall to the wrong player, the chances?
Nah, I wouldn't say that. He's normally good at those. I think we've had more chances. He had another 2 shots in the first half, cleared off the line. But it's just one of those days, and sort of that's where it was today, really.
We've heard all the speculation. I'm sure you've seen it regarding the new manager, but you can't surely judge him on defeat with that game, can you?
Oh, I would like to think not. I think definitely. We've obviously improved in that game massively. To come here, it's difficult to obviously get anything and get to create chances. And I thought we did that. But at the end of the day, we didn't get the 3 points, and we're disappointed to not walk away for at least one.
And as players, do you feel that it's coming together? Do you feel you're all buying into what he's getting you to do?
Definitely. I think that showed today. You know, I think the belief, the character, you know, the passion, the drive that we showed to stay in the game as much as we could and try and keep pushing for the goal.
Frank, a disappointing defeat here at Burnley. Can you just give your overview of the 90 minutes?
Yeah, I can. Still cannot believe, you know, standing here behind the camera that we don't get a point out of this game, or 3 points, because if you see the game, and probably you did, then it's unbelievable that we didn't score and we don't get a point out of this game, and that's very disappointed. The good thing that we created chances, that we control the game. You know, that's a good starting point for next week. But yeah, you have to reward yourself, and that we can blame ourselves to not to reward ourselves to the chances that we had. There were really 100% clear chances, and yeah, we have to be more clinical to make those goals. And again, we conceded a goal just not of an individual action of the opponent, fantastic attack. No, we just gave it to them, and we straightened our bet. So. Mentality-wise, I think there was we had a good reaction after a goal. We directly had I think after 1 minute, Scotty then had a 100% chance in the box. So yeah, we straightened our back and we showed what we can do. But again, you know, football is about scoring goals. And at the end, yeah, if you don't make them, you can only have 1 point if they don't score. But if they score, you lose games. And so we have to do better in. Making our goals.
You spoke on Friday about the work that you and the squad have put in at the training ground. They showed that today, and obviously showed great character to come back after conceding that early goal.
Yeah, that's what I said. You know, I saw a team who really, wanted to do one thing and get back into the game and as soon as possible. And of course, at the end, a draw should be satisfied if you don't make that kind of chances. But yeah, it's, still I'm flabbergasted a little bit, you know, that we are pointless and goalless right now.
And as you all came off, you saw the travelling support, the fans up there behind the goal. Tremendous travelling support, as always, away from home for a Sunday lunchtime match.
Yeah, they are fantastic. We know that already, you know, when we came here, or I knew already, fantastic support. And yeah, it's a pity that we couldn't reward them, you know. With it was a good performance, but a good performance is not enough if you don't score goals.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Frank de Boer, Jason Pungent and Levi Lekima had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Burnley. But make sure to come back next week for a post-match review of the game against Southampton. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.